Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 276 of the podcast. It's March 8th, 2017. My guest today is a lean consultant, although he might not, I know he doesn't prefer that term. He's also an author. He is AJ or Andy Sheppard. Andy is the author of the book, The Incredible Transformation of Gregory Todd, a novel about leadership and managing change. He also contributed a chapter to my Practicing Lean book project. If you go to the blog page for this episode, leanblog.org/276, you can find a link to Andy's bio and website, to his book, to the Practicing Lean book webpage, and you can also download a free PDF of his chapter. So Andy is a coach for leaders of change. His core expertise is helping workforces to quickly achieve systematic change in practice. A former McKinsey & Company consultant, he's now spent 18 years working out this art of transformation in diverse industrial environments across the USA, Europe, and Asia. He continues to draw from prior experience of navigating change in corporate environments and experiencing it on shop floors. So you can learn more about him. His website is www.ajsheppard.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We're going to touch on lean change management, the term he prefers over change management, the need to balance empathy and urgency, and a whole lot more. You can also go, I've been doing this on recent episodes, go again to leanblog.org/276. You can find a PDF summary of the podcast, which you can share with colleagues. You can use it as a way to share some of the things we talk about here to introduce people to the podcast. I know you're listening. Some people out there like reading more than listening, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing these summaries. So as always, I want to thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. Andy, hi. Thank you for being a guest here on the podcast today.
It's a pleasure.
Where are you joining us from today?
I'm working from my office in Worcester, which is in the middle of England. And I've been based in and around Worcester probably for about the last 10 years.
Yeah, well, and beyond where you are, can you give the listeners kind of an introduction to yourself and some of your background here as we get into the discussion?
Sure. I'd probably describe myself, or start by describing myself as a manufacturing man. I'd probably say plant guy if I was talking to my American friends. I love manufacturing plants. I love the blend of people and products. I love that manufacturing bring together people from all sorts of different backgrounds to focus them on adding value. I love that they provide employment for local communities. So I started working at a local industrial unit on the shop floor as a teenager. I then worked I studied manufacturing engineering, then became a manufacturing engineer and worked for a large company, made tin cans. I then became a management consultant, and it's there that I discovered a radical approach to changing an entire operation very quickly. In fact, I was shocked to discover such a thing. And 18 years later, I still practice that approach.
Yeah.
So I now work independently, and I would probably describe myself as a leadership coach because most of my time is spent helping leaders to lead their organization through a transformation process.
So, and that's going to be, I think, an important theme for our conversation here. The problem is probably less about a lack of use of tools or a lack of understanding of tools and more about the broader leadership challenges and change management challenges, right?
That's exactly it. And in fact, focusing on the tools, yes, that's not the whole thing, but that's also problematic in itself because it means that you're ignoring the bigger picture.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sure we'll maybe talk about that later, but certainly what I found is that learning what to do is one thing, but knowing how to do it how to lead your organization to overcome change is quite something else. And that's what I seem to spend more of my time on nowadays.
Yeah.
So I mean, I love. I mean, the approach applies to all kinds of organizations, but I love nothing more than working with a mixed group of people in a manufacturing business to work together and to help them to achieve in practice more than any one of them could have imagined achieving them themselves.
Yeah. Well, and you're the second podcast guest I've had this year who started in a frontline production manufacturing role. Isaac Mitchell from episode 271, who works in lean healthcare today, had similar experience. And thinking back to that, I mean, how do you think that influences the work you do today, having kind of worked directly there in a frontline value adding role that way?
I think it really helps my empathy. That's the main thing. I think probably the two biggest qualities that you need to blend to manage change is empathy and urgency. You need to be able to put yourself in somebody else's point of view to understand what their perspective is in order to be able to communicate properly to them and to understand their concerns and to draw out what they have to offer. And yes, I can certainly relate to what it's like to be on the shop floor and not really understand the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I think, I back when I worked in manufacturing, I knew leaders who had a lot of urgency but very little empathy, if none at all.
Yeah, that's right.
And that led to a very dysfunctional, combative, us versus them sort of environment, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. And I've seen the opposite extreme as well, where there's a lot of empathy and a lot of people try and draw out what employees have to say. And in fact, everyone wants, or somebody might want everyone to have an opinion, but actually, if you're going to change something, you need to overcome inertia. And the only way you can do that is by building momentum and by bringing people with you.
Mm-hmm. And that, there's a phrase that gets used, the quote unquote, the people side of lean, which, I think, well, that it's not even a side. I think it's a vast majority of the challenge for organizations. And, I think people, for my listeners, a lot of them in healthcare have never worked in a factory like you and I have. I mean, I was always an engineer, not working on the front line. But I think people who haven't worked in a factory or haven't even visited factories sort of just don't have an appreciation for the people side, the social side of the quote unquote socio-technical system type term that John Shook and others use. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of people in a factory and why that's so important?
Oh, well, of course. I mean, I suppose the most straightforward thing to say is that nothing happens in a factory or probably most other organizations without people making them happen. You can't, I don't know of any machine that you can just turn on and let it churn out products. Because actually most markets aren't serviced by commodity products nowadays anyway. They're made to specific customer orders, and so you need people who know what they're doing to set machines up, to run the right quantity of parts to the right specification. But more importantly, it doesn't just take the people that are operating the machines. It needs to take all kinds of other people, those that are technical experts who might understand more about the processes. It also obviously needs management oversight, people that are directing the business and make sure it's making money, which actually it wouldn't last very long if it didn't. Looking after the cash flow as well. And but you also need to be able to bridge the gap between people that speak profit and cash flow and people that speak processes and machines and constraints. And so people need to get along with each other, which I guess is the systematic element that you're talking about, which is not always easy to do, but when it happens, it can be brilliant.
Well, and getting along with people, and maybe this comes back to, I love your expression again, the balance of urgency and empathy, where I think sometimes people misunderstand this Toyota notion of respect for people, respect for humanity, and getting along could be misinterpreted as being superficially nice or not challenging people. I mean, how would you describe, or from what you've learned about finding that balance of pushing, challenging people in a respectful way?
I think well, a lot of it comes from your motivation and whether you really respect somebody or not, and respect the role that they have in the company. I think it's really important to really believe that everybody in who's working in a company is doing an important role. Now, one thing that's really important that Toyota Production System thinking has contributed. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of important stuff TPS has contributed, but by stipulating that respect is one of the foundational building blocks, is that actually people need to respect those that actually add value to the process. And obviously that's not always been the case in the history of manufacturing, where people have viewed those that are adding value to be probably the least important of all, and as represented being at the bottom of a hierarchy, when in fact they just have a different role, and in fact adding value is the thing that customers need to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, of course, it's I think TPS corrects maybe traditional manufacturing thinking by saying that yes, people who are adding the value are, you could argue, are most important in the customer's eyes, but actually everybody in a manufacturing plant has an important role and need to respect each other's role. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, and it does. And maybe to build upon that, kind of coming back to your role as a leadership coach, I think one of the challenges with lean transformation starts with the challenge of personal transformation, and a lot of leaders have years, if not decades, of accumulated habits and ways of operating. And it's one thing to sort of state or read or learn about what lean or TPS mindsets are. It's another thing to change. So do you have some stories, or what comes to mind thinking about that challenge of coaching an individual to maybe go from just a base understanding or lip service to really sort of trying to deeply embrace principles and operate with respect?
Wow, that's I think probably the safest place I can start is by using my own example, because what I've come to understand is that as well as learning, I need to unlearn all the time, because there's certain things you pick up, and if you're not careful, you think you're progressing and you think that you're developing and learning and perhaps getting ahead of others, whereas in fact what you're doing a lot of the time is absorbing things and maybe feeding your own sense of self, and perhaps you're becoming less prepared to listen to people, and certainly less prepared to be taught. And how it's relevant to this conversation is that at one particular stage in my career, I thought I already knew quite a lot about lean, and I thought I knew quite a lot about change management. And I started working for a management consulting company and thought actually I had a bit to offer. And in fact, I was learning from somebody who just turned out to be the greatest influence of my career ever, because he modeled how to do something. And I didn't even know that I needed to learn this. In fact, I had no idea what I didn't know. But I was forced to unlearn it. And thankfully, I was only able to unlearn it because I was modeled a much better approach. So that humbled me. And certainly, I think sometimes where people, including myself, aren't open to being taught, then we need to be shown. And being shown is probably more powerful than being taught anyway. And sometimes that's necessary for us to unlearn.
Well, so what do you think, beyond being exposed to a different way or having that modeled, I mean, what do you think made it click in your mind? Because a lot of people get exposed to people modeling the right behavior, but they come up with different reasons or excuses for why they're okay operating the way they've always operated. I mean, can you sort of pinpoint what perhaps was that aha moment for yourself?
For me, it was simple, because because I was going into my first engagement with this consulting company, and I thought that we were promising transformation, but to be honest, I would have been happy if we could have delivered maybe 10 to 15% improvement, and what I actually found myself caught up in under the leadership of this expert who'd been brought in was that suddenly we really were transforming this pretty small manufacturing company of maybe about 50 to 60 people. It was a smaller learning environment crafted for people like me who were fresh in, and so within 4 months we'd reduced the company from 2 separate facilities to be condensed it to 1 facility. We doubled productivity. Lead time had collapsed from 2 months to 2 days, and I couldn't believe we'd achieved so much so quickly. If you'd have told me beforehand we could have done it, I would not have believed it. And to be honest, when I first saw the way in which this expert was behaving, the first impression I had was actually it's a bit unprofessional. And with hindsight, looking back to see why I thought that is because it was disrupting the professional norms that I'd assumed through my previous experience. So he wasn't being disrespectful in any way, don't get me wrong, but he was deliberately being disruptive, and that disruptive behavior is necessary in order to manage change sometimes. For example, rather than arranging a meeting, which might be normal, you go up and talk to someone straight away in order to get something done straight away. You spend less of your time behind your computer, so that you can actually obviously go and see where things are happening on the shop floor way, rather than needing to analyze too much data first.
And so, can you tell a little bit more about that? What was disruptive, or in what way disruptive, and how was it necessary?
I think that there's always inertia in every organization, and if you're going to make a radical change, you need to find some way of disrupting that organization in order to build momentum to overcome the inertia. And the disruptive behavior enables you to drive drive a group of people through a change management process respectfully, but actually leads them to a solution much more quicker than if you're able to just analyze the problem. So a key quality that I learned early on is being what I would call hypothesis driven. So you start with a hypothesis or a vision of what a system could look like. Let's be specific, looking at a manufacturing facility. In terms of what to change, I would always advocate looking at the complete system, a customer order fulfillment process, starting with a customer ordering a product to then manufacturing it and shipping it. So the entire natural flow. If you look at that entire natural flow, that's what to start with, because that's where the waste accumulates along that natural process, because most of the organizational processes cut across that flow. But if you're able to look at that flow, you can then apply world-class principles, TPS principles, and lean, particularly for a manufacturing operation, and have a hypothesis of what it could look like. You can then lead people through a design process, but all the time you've got in your mind an idea of what it could look like, so you can drive people to the answer more quickly. I'm trying to describe everything there is to leading change very quickly, which is probably never a good idea, but in essence it boils down to knowing what to do, knowing how to do it, and also just helping or bringing the right people together and helping them to behave in the right way in order to involve people and to get things done.
So who were some of the mentors or influencers? I always like to ask people how they first got exposed to lean or TPS concepts. Who were some of the organizations or people who influenced you in understanding and learning how to practice lean?
Well, I probably started picking up bits of lean along the way, probably even before I'd heard of the term lean. So, for example, I was sponsored for my university degrees by Shell. So I worked for a year before university at an oil refinery, and there I learned a lot about TPM, which you could loosely consider part of lean. Then I went on to university, and it was a great course. It was a course that was designed to plug the gap between managers and engineers, a manufacturing engineering course. And so we learned a lot about lean during that course. And it was quite a vocational course. We spent a lot of time in industry. So I did some value stream mapping at Land Rover. I then did a placement where I was implementing Kanban at a manufacturer of solar panels. So we got to practice what we were learning about. But as I said, a lot of this I was learning knowledge, and I could learn about things in practice, but the danger was that I picked up this tools-based approach to lean, and it was what I learned from this model, from this person who modeled not just what to do but how to do it. Firstly, in terms of what to do was the systematic approach. In terms of how to do it, it was a model of change that I still practice, that has a very simple diagnose, design, implement, refine, 4 phases, and that brings everyone along on a shared process towards redesigning a value stream.
Mm-hmm.
So the name of the model, the name of this person who modeled this to me is it was Blair McCallum. He was brought in. I was working for McKinsey, was the consulting company, a particular part of McKinsey called the Production System Design Center. And McKinsey, as you might know, it's got a big name in strategic consulting, but more and more McKinsey clients were asking for help in implementing, particularly a lot of the operational excellence practices they were hearing about. And obviously they heard about lean, as they were asking for help to implement lean. And so McKinsey thought that, well, actually, we haven't got a good track record in lean. Let's bring consultants in and bring an expert in, train the consultants and prepare them in more of a sheltered learning environment, so they can then go on and lead transformations for our clients. So that was the part of McKinsey that I joined back in 1999. And Blair was my trainer, and he was the biggest, by far the biggest influence in terms of me learning about lean and learning about how to change.
Yeah, and you're probably trying to help sort of pay that back in different ways. When you talk about the danger of people picking up a tools-based approach, you're working with people and trying to help prevent that, right?
Yes, of course. And in fact, I prefer not to use the word lean, because often it feeds into people's ideas about a tools-based lean, and a lot of people have ideas about what lean is and what lean isn't. In fact, a lot of most companies I work for nowadays think they've already done lean, so it's not particularly helpful then trying to advise people on lean. I know that you use a similar term. You use the word LAME, right? It's an acronym.
It's a forced acronym, right?
Yeah.
Lean as mistakenly explained, or there's variations there. But I think one of the aspects, or an example of lame, would be people saying, sort of past tense, oh, we learned lean, or we did that, we implemented that, to imply either that they're done changing, they're done learning, they're done evolving. It's troubling when we hear people talking that way, right? So
yeah, that's right. And now we've done lean. What's next?
Yeah, well, there's a whole catalog of articles and approaches of people saying, what's beyond lean? I'm like, well,
yeah.
I don't know if we...
But I think it's also responsibility of lean practitioners, not to promote jargon. I think actually it's wrong to encourage people to implement lean in the first place, because lean is, if someone's already talking about we want to implement lean, then you have to ask them why, because unless they really know the problems they want to solve in their business, they're not really going to solve those problems very well. Essentially all they're doing is importing a solution, which is obviously never makes sense.
Yeah.
So people need to understand their needs and the needs of their business in order to be able to solve them properly.
Well, and so maybe those questions maybe leads into one of the other things we were going to talk about. You've already alluded to this, as it says on your website. You talk about 3 central key questions to ask leaders. Can you kind of walk through those questions and maybe an example of applying those questions?
Yes, certainly. I guess what you're referring to is the 3 types of questions to ask in terms of. I think I already mentioned. Firstly, what you need to do. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, understanding your problem and what to do about it. And as I've already said, I would always advocate whenever you're talking about an operation that you need to look at it end to end, because otherwise, if you're looking just a piece of the operation, then you can be spending a lot of time addressing problems that are caused upstream. And so if you actually can look at the whole piece, then you're able to collapse the whole value stream and so much more waste than you would if you were just looking at one particular part of it. So I would say the approach to or the answer really for the question would always relate to insightful redesign. So insightful, applying the right insight for the right types of processes, because every manufacturing process is different, and then redesigning it end to end. So that's number one in terms of what to do, insightful redesign. The second question then is how to change, and I think often there's so much focus given to what to do, all those misunderstanding there, but sometimes how to change is often an afterthought. But obviously, people then further down the journey, they discover all the pitfalls and realise that their organisation is no different to any other, and these complex systems are at work, and a lot of people just give up or think that transformation is impossible. So certainly, I advocate a simple shared process: this diagnose, design, implement, refine, and bringing everyone along you. In a value stream, and having the leader to lead people through that process is really important.
Right.
And then, well, in terms of the third question, I suppose is who, and there's a lot of work that the leader needs to do, which I guess is why a lot of my focus is on coaching the leader, because there's so many things that can go wrong, and well, it's probably worth me mentioning at this point that I hate the term change management. I've got this particular bee in my bonnet about it.
Why is that?
I think because a lot of managers, they use the term change management and they assume that their role as a manager is to manage change, where well, obviously that's part of it. Change does need to be managed very carefully, but also managers need to change. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, managers assume that change is something that's required from everybody else. Right. And in fact, managers need to change as much as anybody else, probably more than other people, because it's their thinking that shaped the organization already. And one of the biggest problems in change management, or I prefer to use the term change leadership, is that people tend to focus on what can be seen. So this is why, again, the people focus on the what, people focus on the operator practices, what they see on the shop floor, but they don't stop to think about the things that are unseen that have influenced that. So, for example, the incentive systems, the management culture, maybe the employment contract, and individual incentives that people might have. So if you try and change an operator practice, but you haven't actually changed the incentive system that's driven that in the past, then obviously it's not going to be sustained, or it's not going to work very well if people are still being driven by something else. So, and these things need to be recognized by managers, but they can only be changed by managers. So that's why a lot of my role in coaching leaders is to recognize the things that need to be changed that can't be seen, and a lot of those are cultural aspects of organizational life.
Yeah. Well, I think there are interesting parallels and challenges in healthcare where that quote unquote operator is a very highly educated, highly skilled physician or surgeon, and hospital executives, I think, are too often trying to change behavior without, as you were saying, looking at underlying incentives, systematic factors that would drive behavior or condition people to act a certain way.
That's right, and it's not pointing fingers or blaming people, because a lot of times managers are acting in a particular way because they believe it's wholly the right thing to do. So, for example, I worked in one plant in the States where there was a very strong management drive to meet their EBITDA targets every month, and probably more excessive in this plant than I've ever seen anywhere else. And you've got to admire that. Resolve. And it's a noble aspiration. They really wanted to meet their targets and do their bit for the division that they were part of. But they didn't realize that what that was happening was driving people under them to do abnormal things that created more trouble. And what they needed to do was to be able to have that honest conversation between themselves, saying, well, how can we work with people further up the leadership chain in order to take a one-time hit in our EBITDA results, so we're not always chasing the next month, and so that we can actually demonstrate the consistency that's needed to implement the structural changes that will get us even more in 3 months' time. So a lot of the time people are part of a culture and they can't see the way in which that's driving negative things and actually restraining their overall potential, even though they're thinking that it's one of their strengths.
Well, and you touch on some of these points and lessons learned in your chapter in the book, Practicing Lean, and thank you again for that contribution, talking about not just technical challenges, but change management, or if not, change leadership lessons learned. So thank you again for that contribution.
It's a pleasure.
Before that contribution, you have your own book, which I wanted to give you a chance to talk about and let the listeners hear about. It's titled The Incredible Transformation of Gregory Todd. If you can tell us about the book and maybe start off by talking about, you referred to this earlier, not using the term lean. Why do you deliberately not call this a quote unquote lean book? What is it? How would you frame it?
Well, I think first of all, the reason I try not to use the term lean, and in this environment I feel safe using the word lean, because I'm imagining most people that are tuning into Lean Blog are doing so because they believe in lean and they think that it's a great thing. So I'm less concerned in this particular environment. But the reason why I'm cautious about using the term lean is because I've come across so many people that misunderstand it, and I didn't want to feed into those misconceptions. So first and foremost, I guess my book is a book about leading change, and yes, it applies to all kinds of organizations. I've chosen to set it in a manufacturing organization because that's really my preferred environment, and it's also the environment where I suppose I feel most expert in commenting on what to do. In terms of the insightful redesign. But it's a novel about leadership and managing change, and I didn't want it to be branded as a lean novel, because the main people that I want to reach are leaders of organizations, and probably they're the people that have the most preconceived notions about what lean is and whether they've already done it. Yeah. And yes, what I really want to do is to be able to to influence those people without tangling myself up in their preconceived notions.
Yeah. Now, who is the character, the namesake character in the title, Gregory Todd, who's going through this incredible transformation?
Yes, so Gregory Todd runs a furniture business that bears his name. The business makes sofas and chairs, and he bought the business out from the person that founded the business a couple of years ago. Well, he bought it out a couple of years ago, and he's already done many of the things that he's always wanted to do. Now he had full control, but he then starts running into trouble. And he knows he needs to do more. He's just not quite sure what it is he needs to do. And what I've tried to do in this book is to give people a flavour of what it's really like to lead change. So hopefully it will resonate with anyone that's been through a change process or even considered going through a lifelike change process. Because I think the reason I chose to write it as a novel is for two reasons. One was is because it conveys that unique flavour that a lot of textbooks can't. Because if you read a textbook about leading change, then I find it hard to disagree with a lot of the content, but it's still very hard to aggregate it all again and practice it afterwards, particularly when you marry it to an organisation that's already full of complex personalities and constraints. It's very difficult to convey the lifeblood of leading change through a traditional textbook. But the second reason for setting it as a novel is because I know that I was only influenced by being shown how to lead change. And so I hope that by writing a novel and by showing other people how to lead change, and also probably just as importantly, that some of the pitfalls to avoid, then other people might be able to learn more and go on to succeed in their own organizations.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's an interesting challenge there when if there's a certain set of readers who might say, well, I'm not interested in lean, or I've already done that, or I don't want to read that. I wonder, is there a similar resistance to the idea of going through an incredible transformation? I mean, they might say, well, my company needs to be transformed, and this comes back to the question again of, well, everyone else needs to change, but not me. How do you find people responding to the book? I mean, what kind of feedback have you gotten from people who've read it and been impacted in some way?
When you said that I don't need to change, my company does, you sounded just like Gregory Todd then.
Right. And I'm speaking on behalf of, I've heard others say that. I'm not saying I don't need to change, but a lot of readers.
Yeah, no, that's right. No, I appreciate that. But I'm sure there's something of Gregory Todd in all of us, really. So the response I've been encouraged by a lot of good response. Firstly, people just saying, "Oh, I felt like I was in the book." At several stages in my career, from the change agent trying to get things done to the general manager that's trying to do the right thing but unsure of really what he should be doing, to the person on the shop floor who is just being buffeted about in the waves, and just is trying to keep his head down and do the best he can.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been good that I've had people have been able to relate to the book. I guess it's early days yet, whether or not it's helping people to transform their own businesses, but I really hope that it will, and certainly to start the conversation about not just what to change, but how to lead change, which is what it's all about.
Yeah. And so you are working on another book right now, a little bit different style of book. Can you kind of give the readers a preview of what you're working on right now?
Yes, sure. So the follow-up book will be called simply How to Lead Change. And the idea is to have a series of pithy lessons, probably just one lesson to each double spread, in terms of the questions we've been talking about. So knowing what to change, how to change, and who should be changing, and how should they be behaving. So that's I'm developing that at the moment, and hoping it will be ready this autumn.
Great. And people, readers, or listeners, the podcast, if they're in the U.S. or other countries, they can find the book through Amazon, or where else do you recommend people finding the book online?
Yes, it's available. It's available on Amazon in the States, in Europe too, and lots of other online stores. It is going to be stocked in high street retailers as well, hopefully. So just keep your eye out for it, and or if you need information on it, then always check out my own website, which is ajsheppard.com.
Well, Andy, thank you for again for your contribution to the book Practicing Lean, which people can find through www.practicinglean.com. All of the proceeds from that book are being donated to the Louise H. Batts Patient Safety Foundation. We're over $1,000, and now that the book is available in paperback format, sales have picked up. That's interesting to see, and hopefully that means even more of an impact and a donation to the foundation. So, Andy, again, thank you for your contribution there, Chapter 14 of Practicing Lean. Thank you for your thoughts and comments today. Do you have any sort of final kind of other piece of advice that's burning to come out of you that you'd like to leave the listeners with before we wrap up?
I just think I'd encourage everybody to keep on learning and keep on unlearning, and probably to focus on the latter, because that's probably gets less attention.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the themes we tried to bring across in Practicing Lean, and thank you again for your reflections of continuing to learn, continuing to practice, and get better at what we do. So again, our guest today has been Andy Sheppard. Thank you so much for talking today. It's great to talk to you after collaborating a little bit on the book.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.